Happy Saturday, everybody. It is the 26th of October, and my window is really small. Let's get that back to where it should be. And as you can see, we have left things in the same, more or less, condition they were in yesterday when we ended the show. We ran out of time. Since then, I went ahead and activated Windows, and I've also managed that one cable. So all has changed. We're going to go ahead and bring up the case today and put the motherboard and power supply into the case and get this build finished, because I'm super excited to get it done, and I'm sure Richard will be anxious to receive it. And this should be a great computer that lasts him no less than 8 years, trouble-free. You know, we run into this issue all the time where people don't seem to be weighing in consequences. They only see one side of things. Not Richard, but I'm referring to people in general in regards to the new Intel processors being released, which, you know, look, no first generation product in CPUs has ever come out and just hit a home run. Maybe Core Duo? I'm not sure, but for the most part, when a first generation product happens, it's it's the beginning of something new. And usually, you know, they keep polishing and polishing. And what we end up dealing with in this business are customers that need to be reminded. And so since this has come up recently, I feel the need to remind you guys that you can go very inexpensive in your budget and have a product that is slow and unreliable. You can go money is no object and buy a machine that's bleeding edge, full of stability issues, that runs hot, it's inefficient, costs a lot of money and electricity to run it. And if you're of that nature, you likely won't be keeping it 8 years. You'll probably want something new like that all the time. And if you have that kind of money and you deal with those kind of problems, there's always this trade-off between the cheap and the expensive. And usually what they have in common is reliability. And then right down the fat middle, you have your regular everyday user. That makes up the majority of computer owners. And just like with vehicles, you've got your cheap budget cars that are stripped down. They don't last a very long time. They break apart. They're not as reliable. You've got your super expensive cars like Ferraris, kind of the same thing, right? They're not known for reliability. They're not known for being inexpensive. And, you know, the only way these cars last this long on the high end is they don't get driven. So if you don't use it, it'll last a really long time. But if you don't use it, that's the same as not having it. But then when you think about the majority of cars that are sold here in the United States, these are your Chevys, your Fords, your Toyotas, your Nissans. These are your right down the middle. Hyundai, you know, Hyundai's got a low end and a high end. Chevy has a low end and a high end. Right down your middle is the vast majority of cars and trucks and SUVs that are being sold in America. It's not the low end that's outselling, and it's not the high end. Those make up tiny percentages on each end of the spectrum, and right down the middle, that's the sweet spot to be in, where you're getting value for your money. You get power, efficiency, price, reliability to varying extent within that budget, between budget and between high end. And then within that mid-range, there's a budget, middle, and high end within the mid-range. What I try and do for my customers is offer them an experience where they don't have to keep repeating and rebuilding their operating system and setting up everything all over it. It's time for another computer again, and you got to reinstall all your applications, and you got to start all over. Customers hate that. So then on top of that, here's another bill, here's another bill, here's another bill. One of the things that's difficult for me in my business is my goal is to put myself out of business in the same way a doctor's goal is to treat you so you don't need to come back for any more treatment. That's what it should be. A mechanic's goal would be to fix your car so you don't need to keep bringing it back to the mechanic. Now, of course, other things can break on a car and other health issues can occur as a consequence in health. But if I do my job right, you shouldn't need to see me again for a long time, barring, you know, a statistically implausible but possible scenario where there's some sort of a power outage or just a bizarre failure of a component coincidentally within, you know, some period of time that I last looked at it. But overall, 98% of the time when I fix a computer, it'll be years before I ever see that computer again. And most computers I build I don't see them again until 8 years later when the customers say, time to upgrade, and they want to buy another one from me. Well, getting one sale from one customer every 8 years, that's a tough way to do business. And you can understand why businesses wouldn't want to do that. You need the same customer coming back much more frequently. So I don't care. My goal is that if I need 8 times as many customers as the other guy to get me by every 8 years, then that's the business model, because it's the right way to do things. And this new Intel Ultra line of cooler is line of CPU is what we should be excited about, not because it's the best thing Intel's ever made, but because Intel has been spit polishing for 13 generations, the same chip over and over and over again. When a chip first comes out, it's going to have issues. That's inevitable. No, AMD was not immune from this. And for you to expect anything other than that, unless you're new here, this is the way it works. This is how it's always worked. It's never been any different. And for anybody to expect it to just, this idea that there's this new chip coming out and it's going to be better than anything else. Well, Snapdragon, or Qualcomm said that about the Snapdragon. Now they're doing it again. Qualcomm's repeating the same nonsense all over again. They create all this hype. And my question for you is, why do you guys keep falling for it every single time? Look, if I pretend to throw the ball and the dog looks, and I pretend to throw the ball and the dog looks, and this continues for the entirety of the dog's life, it's because it's a dog. But if I did that to you, at some point you should catch on that I'm not throwing that ball. I don't understand why so many people online still believe marketing hype coming from manufacturers. It's always exaggerated. It's always excused after the product is released. So the good news is we have stopped, Intel has stopped polishing for 14 generations, 13 generations of nothing but polishing. And they finally started to do something new. So again, we have the low end and we have the high end. The low end being, this is a brand new product, I would avoid it. It wouldn't matter who makes it. My advice has always been the same on this. You can go all the way back, as far back in my videos as you want. It has nothing to do with the manufacturer. It's a new product, you should wait. If you're not gonna wait, expect to spend more and expect to deal with the problems. That's your reward. Wait 1 year. Now, after that year, things should get better. And then continually get better year after year. But then after a certain number of years, the amount of getting better starts to diminish until there's nothing left of it. So Intel has pushed their architecture to the point that it no longer, they can't squeeze anymore. It looks like you're juicing lemons, you know? They're juicing it to the point that there's no juice left. And that's why we had these problems in 13th and 14th generation chips, because Intel should have done this before they reached that point. This is Intel's fault for just being essentially lazy or not putting enough effort in marketing and research to get this product out sooner. Because the sooner they get it out, the sooner they can start refining it. So I expect when we get our Ultra 7 chip, it should be arriving today. We'll still have to wait till next week or the week after that for the motherboard. And we're gonna do the build, but I'm not selling this to any customers. I'm building it for our own experience and to set up your expectations so you understand what risks you're taking if you wanna be first, what it's gonna cost you in frustration, and what it's gonna cost you financially. This is a first generation product, but it's also finally something different. Now Intel can polish this for the next 10 years or longer and keep refining it and making it better, but finally we're getting a chip that's far more power efficient if you run it the way Intel intended. If you remove all of the Intel engineering specifications and you disrespectfully ignore them and crank everything up to full, then the morons who do this conclude, look, it's not more power efficient. Once you put your foot down onto the floor of the Prius, it doesn't get 54 miles to the gallon. It now gets 14 miles per gallon. And a BMW M3 Sport will end up getting you better gas mileage if you drove it the same way as the Prius. Well, because a Prius wasn't designed to be driven flat out like a race car and at the same time to get 54 miles to the gallon. If you want that efficiency, you've got to drive the car the way it was intended to be driven. And if you wanted a race car, you should not have bought a Prius. So the problem is on the consumer. The problem is on the content creators here on YouTube seem to be fixated on gaming. I don't know where the professionals went, but it feels like most of the reviews handling this new chip, they think they're dealing with Xboxes. They don't seem to understand the difference between an Xbox and a PC. They're consumers. PCs are not ideal for consumers. A PC is a creation device. If you want to consume, you just need a phone or a tablet, an Xbox or a PlayStation. You're in the wrong lane. You've got the wrong car. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It's no wonder you're upset because you have unreasonable expectations of what you just purchased. You don't understand what you bought, and now you're going to make a video about it and tell everybody how terrible it is. I went to this French restaurant, and they put snails on the plate. You want to talk about bad hygiene. How dirty is that restaurant that there's just random snails on my plate? Okay, number one, they're not random snails. Number two, that is your food. Number three, the health inspection was A+. And number four, you sound like a complete moron who didn't understand what you ordered. This is the world we're living in right now. And the unfortunate circumstance is here on YouTube, because I'm guessing of the economic status of how difficult it is to make videos to financially survive, all of the professionals seem to have mostly gone away. And all we're left with now are enthusiasts who only care about one thing, and that's gaming. And the one thing all gamers have in common is nothing's ever good enough, everything's too expensive, there's not enough frames per second. But this doesn't play into why they suck at playing their game. This is the part I don't get. It doesn't matter how many frames per second you get. That does not improve your skill as a gamer. So I don't understand the mentality. I can tell you it's toxic, it's not healthy, and it's unreasonable to demand nothing more but frames per second instead of actually working on your skill. But go ahead and put the blame on it. It's the CPU. That's why I'm so terrible at my game playing, is because my CPU isn't fast enough. The idea and the disrespect and the complete disconnect that we finally have something new from Intel and it needs refining was the point of this launch. But people got wrapped up in the marketing materials like they've never heard of all this exaggeration, like AMD didn't do the same thing. Like Intel hasn't been through this with RAM bus RAM and Optane memory. Every single company in this industry that I can think of, their marketing companies exaggerate the upcoming new products, and almost every single time when the new product comes out, it does not match all of the claims and promises made by the marketing company. If it's a new video card, if it's a new laptop, if it's a new CPU, whatever it is, the reality is always different than the hype. So I am shocked at the number of reviews I'm seeing from from amateurish content creators who don't understand what they're reviewing. And they have an unreasonable expectation of why the chip was made, what it means, and where it's going, and instead just acting like they're shocked. I can't believe that this doesn't match the hype. When has the hype ever matched the product? Not in this industry. I'm not aware of that ever happening. So anyway, I am excited to get the Ultra 7, and I don't expect it to be this rocket ship of a chip. What I am expecting is that from this point forward, Intel has a new foundation to build on, which holds for a more promising future than continuing to do what they've been doing, which has been getting worse and worse and worse. And the same is true with AMD. By the way, I said the same exact thing about AMD. I was never against AMD, but that's what some people heard. I go, good for AMD for coming out with this new Zen architecture. I won't buy it or recommend it. It's too new and it's going to have problems. And it did. But now look where it is today. And then gamers universally will absolutely say AMD is better than Intel, but those gamers generally suck at whatever game they're playing. When you compare them to somebody who's very good at the game, the people who are good at the game and the people who own the high-end hardware are usually two different people. The high-end hardware doesn't make you a better gamer. And you're going to be a better gamer in the same way that a chef is still going to prepare you a good meal in old pots and pans or expensive pots and pans. A photographer is going to take a better picture than you are, regardless if they're using a point-and-shoot camera or they've got a professional camera. You're still going to suck at driving no matter how nice your car is if you're not good at driving. This does not compensate for skill, and this is not what the chip was designed for. Intel did not design a gaming chip. This is not going in an Xbox. This is not going in a PlayStation. Nobody ever said it was. So to expect it to do that it's not for you. This is a content creator's chip. This is for productivity for a PC that was designed to be for somebody to create something with. This is a creation device. This is a consuming device. Nothing would exist on this for you to use unless somebody had one of these to write it all out. Are those articles that you read online? Those were all written on a computer. They weren't written on a cell phone. This is so obvious. So please don't buy into the sheeple online all whining and complaining about the Ultra 7 or the Ultra series of Intel processors. It was never, ever going to be right out of the gate a #1 hit. It's got to take, it's never been done. Intel has never done this before. That's the part you're supposed to be excited about. We finally got out the door. We haven't gotten to the destination yet, but we got out of the house. Can we at least celebrate that? That's all I'm saying. Finally, Intel got on board with that, and it's about damn time. They waited too long, and I'm not saying there's nothing to be upset about with regards to how long it's taken Intel to get on board. I'm not standing here and defending that decision, but the fact that they finally did it, that's what our focus should be on. Then as they refine it in the generations ahead, especially the next generation, that's when things should start to look very promising, because now we have something, we have the whole thing to build up on. On the previous generation, we built up much higher, when I say we, Intel built up on that, and they should have stopped 2 years ago. They get every year, it's sort of like you can get a little more, 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 and then you reach the pinnacle with the apogee of the best that tech can do. And then anything else you're getting out of it comes at a risk of generating more heat and generating more failure rates. And once you reach that, you have little choice but either stop innovating, get out of the chip business, or just leave it at that one model for the rest of time. Say that's as good as we can get it, or you have to start over with a new architecture and you start from the beginning, which means it's time. It's like you cut a piece of wood. Hey, we finally got a brand new piece of wood. That old rotted piece of wood can go. Well, it can't go yet. We have to dry the wood out. We have to cut and shape it. And then it can be put in, sanded down, and painted. This is a process. It doesn't come off the tree in the shape of a chair. I don't understand people. But the marketing is always the same. The marketing is always hype. How are you people still believing that Qualcomm hasn't just blatantly lied to your face year after year after year? This Elite Snapdragon, or the Snapdragon Elite X, where'd all the hype go? Have you forgotten already how recently you were manipulated and now you're allowing it to happen again? Do we have the attention span of a goldfish? When are we going to pick up on this habit? The marketing companies hype the product. The product comes out, doesn't live up to the expectations, and we all act shocked. Oh, sorry if I come across negative, but I prefer to be surprised in a good way, not in a bad way. So I will always assume the hype is not going to be matched. It will be worse, and I hope for the best. And if I'm wrong, I'm happy that I'm wrong. But if you took the reverse and you believed all the hype, then you're emotionally upset and you are disappointed because you had unreasonable high hopes because you believed, you made a choice to believe the marketing company. They paid millions of dollars to psychologically manipulate you, and you played right into their hands. So I'm asking us to rise above that, because they're going to keep doing it. As long as you guys keep taking the bait, they're going to keep fishing. Let's have reasonable expectations, and let's buy the right chip. If you're a gamer, buy a gaming chip. If you're a content creator, buy a content creating chip. If you're a consumer, buy a consuming device, and I can almost guarantee you'll be happy with your purchase every single time, because now you'll be making informed and reasonable decisions with informed and reasonable expectations. So anyway, I'm just a little frustrated at the amount of negativity where most of these content creators that are thumbs downing the Intel Core Ultra chip don't understand what they're reviewing. And I don't know. Like I said, it's just like buying a Prius and you're trying to drive it around the racetrack and you're complaining you're not getting 54 miles to the gallon. It's so preposterous and ridiculous to me. I don't understand why that's such a popular thing right now on YouTube. It's weird. So I had to get that off my chest. Please don't play into that nonsense. Welcome in, everybody. Get that off my chest. No, this Core Ultra 7 chip that we're getting, it's not going to be a rocket chip. And it's going to do some things better for me, you know, somebody who's getting work done. I don't care how it plays Cyberpunk 2070. I've never played Cyberpunk. I wouldn't mind. I don't have time. And if I wanted to play Cyberpunk, I'd fire up my Xbox. I don't know how much clearer I can make this. And if I suck at Cyberpunk, buying a better system isn't going to make me a better player. Buying a better baseball bat is not going to make me a better hitter. It's just, I don't understand the mind of the enthusiast. I've lost any ability to track with the logic they're using. And it's so important to them that they make this content, and then others have to make the exact same content without an original thought in their head. They just keep repeating each other. And then the poor viewer is getting this information hammered in their head, and they believe everything they're hearing is true because it's being repeated. And the more you repeat something, the more likely it becomes accepted as truth, even though it's an opinion from an unreasonable expectation from an enthusiast and not a professional. So where are my professionals at? Where are the people that actually make any content with their computer? That's what I want to know. Because if you're not making anything with this, if you're not creating, you don't need one of these. Just telling you, you don't need this. This is overkill. All right, I think I've made myself clear, I hope. Let's see, Luke Greeny is saying hello. Richard Claiborne says hello. Richard's the gentleman we're building the computer for. And $10 from Richard in Super Chat. Thank you, Richard. So every once in a while, if you look hard enough, you will find some YouTube content creators actually telling you the honest, unbiased truth about the new Intel Ultra chip. And if you see those videos, please thumbs them up, because they're hard to find in the mess of enthusiast negative videos that don't understand the chip. I'm just telling you, there is another perspective, and it's not being well represented here. I just want you to be aware of that. I'm not defending Intel. I'm not an Intel fanboy. The fact that this chip needs work is true of all first generation chips. This is how the process works for everybody. And thank goodness we got started. Peter Lightcock, there's Buster with a 10-pound super chat, says, good evening, Carey and Mara and everyone in the chat. All the best from Bonnie, Scotland. The temperature in Edinburgh, 46 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 7 degrees Celsius. And it's raining. Just popped in to say hello. I'll catch up tomorrow. Thank you, Buster. Good to see you, my friend. Mark Gaines saying hello. 3D Everything. And Phil Stodd joining us. Michael Lavelle. Jack Kogelmus says hello. He's in Toronto, where he says it's a chilly 51 degrees Fahrenheit. Saluku with a $2 super chat says, I bought a Steam Deck and called it a day. Steam Deck, hey, you want to play games? That's designed to do that. Now, if you want to engineer a new type of car or engine, if you want to write the world's best novel or any novel, cookbook, anything, probably don't want to use a Steam Deck for that. I should start making videos complaining about how terrible the Xbox is in rendering videos. I got the new Xbox processor, and you know, I got to tell you, in Adobe Premiere, it's terrible. Like, let's compare this Xbox to the PlayStation in Adobe Premiere. I don't sound so crazy anymore, do I? Because I'm sure you're going, well, what moron would try and run Adobe Premiere on an Xbox or a PlayStation? Thank you. Now we're communicating. I don't know why it doesn't work the other way around. You could obviously see you bought the wrong product to do that job, and you have unreasonable expectations, and complaining about it is like complaining that you don't have the education to understand what you're talking about. You're basically admitting to the world voluntarily by creating a video to complain about you lack knowledge, and now you want to complain because you lack the knowledge about how terrible the product is instead of educating yourself. It is a bizarre world. It's very bizarre. I got to tell you though, that Xbox is just terrible at Photoshop, Adobe Premiere. Whew, terrible. Don't mind me, I'm amusing myself. Saluku, thank you for your $2 super chat. Yes, we should be getting the machine from so Richard, the gentleman who we're building the machine for, he's got a pre-built Asus desktop that he's having nothing but problems with. It freezes and it's intermittent. And as I mentioned, intermittent problems can take a while to figure out. But once he has this unit in his hands, he won't need the other unit anymore. And of course, I don't want it. I just want to fix it and then give it back to him. And we have a lot of computers here, and we have a hard time finding customers for them locally. So the last thing I want is to add to my stack of computers that, you know, people aren't buying right now with the economy and such. So I just want to fix it and then give it back to him so I can get it out of here. But I think it'd make a great video, a diagnostic video, and we can actually see what the symptom is. We can hopefully reproduce the symptom and be able to resolve finally why it's broken. He doesn't want to use it anymore, but I'm sure he wouldn't mind selling it to help pay for the cost of the new machine. But once a customer has lost confidence, it doesn't matter if the product gets better. They've already written you off. I've lost confidence in Hyundai because of my experience, which is unlike any other car I've ever owned in my life, any other new car, as the single most unreliable car I've ever owned. Just things would fall apart within the first 6 months that never fell apart in 19 years of owning my Chevy Blazer. The Blazer needed repairs more often the older it got, but the Hyundai needed repairs out of the gate. So while Hyundai might make great cars today, I'm done with them. I will not go back. They've lost forever my customer confidence. Even if they have a better deal, I will not go through all of that trouble. And I don't like the way I was treated by the dealer. The price is no longer a big factor for me in the sense that if it's $1,000 more to buy another manufacturer, money well spent. Somebody else might buy a Hyundai and say it's the best car they ever owned. But this is why I say experience is so much more important than just watching reviews or reading things on the internet. Because nothing you say will make my experience any more acceptable or will change my mind. I'm done with them. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So once bitten, twice shy kind of a thing. It's not worth the risk for me to go through that whole process again. And I was stuck with that car until I wasn't upside down in it that I could get rid of it, forcing me to live with the problems and keep taking it back to the dealer over and over and over. Anyway, to each their own. Maybe if I'd have gotten the same car built in a different day, it would have been a finding. I don't know. Quality of materials, workmanship, and customer service fails across the board for me and that company. But when you lose customer confidence, you quite often can never gain it back. No matter how much Microsoft fixed Windows Vista, even though at the end it was pretty solid, there's nothing more they could do other than rebrand it again and give it a different name. And well, it's Windows 8 now. Once you've soiled the name, you have to rebrand, because rebuilding trust to the customers, almost impossible. So you go, okay, here's something new. We're going to start over. Here's Windows 8. And really it's Windows Vista, but they tweaked it and changed the title. That is sort of the industry as a whole. When the Ford Taurus wasn't selling very well, they renamed it the Ford 500. Same car. All they did is change the name. And guess what? Customers weren't that dumb. They go, that's a Ford Taurus. And guess what? Sales didn't help. So then they said, we've actually made the situation worse because nobody's heard of a 500. Put the Taurus name back onto it. So Ford put the Taurus name back on. Sales still sucked because they didn't fix the product. And not only that, American habits were changing with regards to more people were buying trucks and SUVs than buying sedans. So the only sedan Ford makes today is a Mustang. Everything else is a truck or an SUV. They no longer make sedans. They don't make them. You want a truck or an SUV, Ford has plenty for you to purchase. You want a 4-door sedan? Nope. If that's what the buying public wants, then they're going to focus all their time and energy and money into providing as many options possible in that segment that's selling. And then when you reach a point like we are right now, where the economy's bad and cars aren't selling, now they've got lots full of trucks and trucks and trucks and trucks that aren't selling. So Ford's a great company to go to if you want a truck or an SUV and you want a lot of selection. They're all in the lots for you to pick from. But if you want a 4-door sedan, you better go to Nissan, or you better go to Toyota, maybe even Chevy, because Ford has nothing for you that's new. Oh, and Chrysler. Yeah, Chrysler still makes sedans. All right. So, yeah, I just had to do my monologue there because it seems like most of the new content being published today in the tech arena is all about the Ultra 7, or I keep saying Ultra 7, the Core Ultra processors from Intel, and how terrible they are. If you have nothing new to add as a content creator, why are you just doing the same thing all the other? Where's your original thought? That's my issue. They're just repeating each other. And I don't know who came first, but I would very much love an independent thinker to create content. And there are some out there. I'm not saying there aren't, but you kind of have to dig around. Most of the reviews you're going to see are coming from enthusiasts. They are not coming from content. They're not coming from creators. It doesn't have to be a content creator, just a creator. These are gamers that are complaining. The chip was never for gamers. They should be educated and understand what expectations they were supposed to have. If you weren't interested in a non-gaming chip, why did you review it and then complain about it not being good at gaming? How could you not know this? Anyway, I think I made my point 7 times over, right? Let's, we have one last cable I gotta manage right here. Let me get that out of the way. And then we'll get the case up here with the Lazy Susan. And this will be the first time opening the case. I've not worked on this Focus G from Fractal Design, so I'm not exactly sure what kind of an experience that'll be, but I hope for the best. Let me tell you how bad this new Intel chip is on gaming. Really, the chip that's not designed for gaming? Tell me more. Oh, I'm going to go off on it for 45 minutes. And I'm going to compare it to gaming chips. Okay. Just to show you how terrible it is at gaming. Oh, I believed you the first time. So the reason you're upset is the chip is failing? No. It's running too hot and burning up? No. Something's defective? No. Why are you upset? Well, it's not as fast in frames per second as the previous gen. And? Well, then it's a ripoff. Is that how that works? I thought it had something to do with the chip actually functioning, but what do I know? You would think these chips were catching fire and burning people's houses down. Don't buy this. Like some kind of burger being sold at McDonald's. Don't eat that. All right. So I'm just going to wrap this up a little bit here. It does have that button, which likely will never need to be pressed because we do have support for the RGB on the board. And this button is like an override to turn that off. But what I want to be careful of is I don't want to push the button down with the zip tie. And then the customer's like, why won't my RGB stay on? And that would be my fault as the builder if I allowed that to happen. Just want to move this over. So, fortunately for me, this does not want to cooperate. All right, I think we're good enough. So I'm going to pop that on here like this. And again, this is our ARGB header, and this will allow us to use the Mystic Light software from MSI to control the RGB, or it'll just default. You don't have to use the software. It'll just default to color cycling, and you can just leave it. And I believe you can turn it off altogether in the BIOS, once again, not requiring any software if the RGB bothers you. And yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Let me get the Lazy Susan up here, and let's get to work. I suppose I won't need this keyboard and mouse for a minute, so I am definitely going to have to rearrange Studio C in a way that I have a bigger workbench, but I don't have any room to put a bigger workbench until I clear out everything that's in the way. So that's got to be done first, and then this whole workbench situation can be resolved. But for now, I'm just going to wing it and try and find a place and hopefully remember where I put it in 20 minutes. All right, let me grab the case over here. There we go. I feel like these screws are supposed to stay captive, and maybe I can't really tell. Those two screws stayed in. Yeah, that's captive, and that one's captive, but those two came out. You can obviously unscrew captive screws, so my driver may have been a little aggressive in that. It doesn't hurt anything. It's just very convenient to not have to go looking for the screws later. I guess I'm going to put this down here. For now, again, we have a plastic window there. Now the fans on this up front, they look clear, which would imply to me that they're RGB fans on the front. All front mounted fans always blow air into the computer. And the idea is that you want to bring air in, through, and out the back. The last thing you want to do is start moving the air in different directions, because now you're impeding airflow. Think of it like water. You've got water running this way. Okay, picture the air as water. It's coming in from the front, it's going out through the back, and it's cooling everything as it flows. The minute you stop the flow of water, then the heat stops transferring and the water starts getting hot. That's how a radiator works in your car or your liquid cooler, is the water has to flow and have air blow on it through the fins of the radiator that cools that water or that liquid down, and then it cycles back through again. If the pump stops turning, the water sits idle and it just heats up and eventually boils. Now, same works with air. When we're monitoring for airflow, we don't even need these two front fans. These two front fans, unless you have a big graphics card that's getting hot, these are just for show. They don't do much in regards to actually cooling anything. And if you don't believe me, disconnect your front fans, and you're going to find two things are going to be true. One, your system's going to be quieter and draw less power, and it'll likely generate less heat because the fan motors get hot. And the fan motors are in the case, you're adding heat inside your case. I know against the fans only move air. They don't cool the air. If you've got a ceiling fan and you have a say a thermostat in the room, your thermostat will read the temperature of the room regardless if the ceiling fan is on or off. The fan moving does not cool the room. It's just not how it works. All the fan is doing is it's moving the air. Now, if you're moving hot air and drawing in cold air, obviously that can cool the room. But a ceiling fan is not an air conditioner. These are two different things. As a human being, having the moving air over our skin is very refreshing. Even though the temperature of the room is not changing, we start to feel cooler because of the movement of the air. But here's the problem. You ever have one of those oscillating fans? And it's very refreshing when it's your turn. And then as the fan keeps moving, you're like, ah. It's like, please bring the fan. Come on, oscillate faster. Well, in the sense, when you're putting all different kinds of fans in, the more fans you add likely have the opposite effect of cooling. And there's nothing wrong with having the fans in here. They're not causing any harm. They're just unnecessary, and you can prove that by simply unplugging them and doing your own, however you measure your CPU temps or whatever temps you're measuring, see for yourself. Don't believe me. Prove me wrong. If you have a big graphics card right here generating heat, then you need those fans. They're going to blow air over that card. If you don't have a big graphics card, you do not need those fans. They're for aesthetic purposes only. Now, some people talk about negative air pressure and positive air pressure. This is one of the most ignorant statements I've ever heard in my life from people who obviously have no understanding of dust. Whether or not you have negative or positive air pressure, you are still going to have an accumulation of dust. Depending on where you live, that accumulation will vary how long the computer stays on. How much dust will you get with positive air pressure versus negative air pressure makes no difference. You still need to open the computer and blow the dust out of it, or you're going to run into an overheating problem when you have so much dust the system can't cool regardless. You still need to blow the dust out of it. Some might argue, well, with positive air pressure, you don't need to blow the dust out as often. Prove it. Prove it to me. Show me a case and how much dust buildup comes out of it. Don't just visually look at it. blow the dust out of it, and let's see how much comes out of there. And do that, testing it in negative and testing it in positive, and tell me when it wasn't necessary. You will never negate the need to blow the dust out of the case. And how frequently you need to do that is based more on the environment you live in than on whether or not you have negative or positive air pressure. You want to talk about some silly made-up nonsense. This is not experimental stuff at MIT. This is consumer-based. It's mostly bulletproof stuff. So these little details only matter when you're working with experimental IT that's very finicky and edgy, or if you're an extreme enthusiast. For the rest of us, it's irrelevant and makes no different practical difference in the real world that you can measure or prove. It's an idea that people are wrapping their head around and embracing it as though it were true without actually proving it. So you do what you want. I mean, it doesn't make a difference in my life, but dust is dust. And you're going to need to blow the dust out of your system no matter what. By the way, does your power supply, does that have, someone remind me, does that have negative air pressure or positive air pressure in your power supply? How much dust is in your power supply? When's the last time you've checked your power supply's filter? Why are we not talking about this? How hot is your power supply getting? What's the temperature of your power supply right now? Maybe that's the reason why your games aren't playing very well. Maybe you need more wattage in your power supply. This is called sarcasm. And what I'm telling you is that the power supply is one of the most critical components of your system, but I don't see you adding any fans or liquid cooling to it. I don't see you monitoring its temperature, and I don't see how you can tell if it's dusty or not. How do you know? So by fixating your mind on something that is impractical and unreasonable, the harm it's causing is it's taking you away from paying attention to the important things that nobody's mentioning, or very few people are mentioning it because, you know, we all just keep repeating one another on YouTube videos. This is the part you should be watching your temperatures on. This is the part you should be watching for dust, your power supply. But you don't have to if you don't want to. How come more people don't mention that? That's what I want to know. When you figure that out, you let me know. Why are they talking about stuff that doesn't matter and then not telling us about the stuff that does matter? I don't know why. You'd think there'd be kind of a balance in there somewhere, right? Well, this person does it. Oh yeah, there are people who do it, but good luck finding them. Needles and haystacks, man. All right, so let's see what we got. We've got, well, it looks like a pretty standard ATX case. We've got our 3.5 inch 2-bay drive cage down here. And in there we have a cardboard box that's going to have all of the mounting hardware that this case requires for mounting optical drives, motherboards. The screws are always proprietary to the case. You're not intended to use them all, and you should save them for any sort of upgrade or repairs you will have in the years ahead. Put the extra screws away because they are proprietary to the case. They will be very difficult to replace. So those are the accessories. These drive trays are upside down. That's kind of weird. Is that how they go in? I think they go in upside down. Or at least from my perspective, they're upside down. Now, Richard has 2 optical drives that'll be going in. And this has 2 ports. He's got a DVD and a Blu-ray. So we can take these pieces out right now. Well, it's been a long time since I put an optical drive in a computer. Something is not letting me. Well, I'll tell you what, I bet you the front of this just pops off, this bezel. This is pretty thin plastic, so Richard, be careful when you take this off, especially as it ages, it'll get brittle. There's no screws or anything, just plastic clips in here in the desert. They will dry out in a few years, and this isn't really an item that's meant to be taken off very often. So if you're someone that keeps pulling it off, putting it back on again, you're likely going to experience a fracture. in the plastic over time. It's something I watch for in cases now when I'm selling to clients, because I have clients that have all aluminum Leon Lee cases, the PC99 that I sold them 15 years ago, that we just keep changing the motherboard in them. Everything's aluminum and everything screws down. So the cases are impervious except to dents, I suppose, physical damage. But as far as working on them, you just can't wear them out. They were expensive, you know, at the time they were $100 when you could buy a case for $40. But, you know, I explained to the customer, if you want to be able to maintain these cases and save the money moving forward, you don't have to buy another case for a very long time. And they said, sign us up. They're attractive. We like them. They're brushed aluminum. There's really no plastic on them. As a result, they still have them to this day. And we've probably upgraded them 5 or 6 times by now. At least 4 times. Probably more than that. On the other hand, if you're somebody that just likes to have new stuff all the time, it doesn't really matter because you're not going to keep it very long. Or if you're not somebody who's constantly getting in there and messing about with it, it'll probably be okay. And, you know, the side panels are fine. They're okay. It's the front that's all plastic, and it's already a couple of years old, I can tell. So we're going to go ahead and take these out. What's interesting to me is these are actually built quite well with the metal reinforced mesh on the front. That's too bad they didn't do the whole thing that way. But then it wouldn't have sold for as cheap as this did. This is a $60 case or something. So it's fine. Just have reasonable expectations on why the price on this is different from other models that Fractal Design and others make. It's not a bad thing. There's a like a piece of metal here for like blocking interference, RF interference. And you would leave this in, obviously, if you weren't putting a drive in here. It's not necessary. It's more of an FCC thing than it is an actual necessity for the end user. But there we go. That at least gets us ready for those optical drives to be installed. And if the optical drives ever get removed and Richard says, you know, I don't want to use these anymore, you just keep these and just pop them back in. This piece can be thrown into the recycle bin. We'll never need that ever again. All right, so power supply. Well, let's take a look at the motherboard. Let's make sure this board's going to fit. There are no pre-installed motherboard standoffs. You'll find on more expensive cases that the motherboard standoffs are pre-installed in a standard ATX location to that standard. And in this Focus G, we just have the center post installed, no other standoffs. That means we're going to have to manually assemble this, where this is normally done for you on higher end cases. It's not a big deal, but it does explain why something may sell for a little bit more or a little bit less for these little details. But this isn't like, let me put it to you this way. Let's say you're me and you've got to build 8 of these today, right? Because you're running a business. Having to do this on all 8 of them is going to take you longer and increase your labor cost. So buying a case where it's already done may cost a few dollars more, but your productivity and how many you can build in a day will go up at least by 1, just with the time savings of getting them out, tightening them down. And the more you're building, the more time you're losing in that process. So for most of you, probably all of you watching, I would assume none of you are building computers at that scale. But if you're wondering why I point it out, is, you know, I've had videos, if you look at my video history, one video had 14 builds in it. I had 14 computer builds in a series of videos that needed to be done for one client. They were all delivered at the same time. And I couldn't deliver them until they were done. And everything I had to do extra delayed when that customer got those machines, which delayed when I got paid. And it also delayed my ability to help any other customers while my time was being monopolized by that project. So the goal is to try and get it done quickly, efficiently, accurately, and as inexpensively as possible in order to make your customer happy and in order to be able to help other customers and move on to other projects. If you're just a home user and you got one computer, you might enjoy putting the little standoffs in. Why not? It's just, again, it's not a common thing you hear from content creators on YouTube regarding running a business versus being a home user. And so you may not, it may not even occur to you to think of that. Like your default way, who cares? Well, when there's money and time at stake and the scale is bigger, it adds up real quick. How many mounting points? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So it's the standard ATX. We're going to need 8 of these because just the center post is installed. And usually they give you 1 or 2 extra. And now to tighten these down, some people will grab a pair of pliers, which scratches up the paint. And I mean, you're not going to see it anyway. But as a professional, I'm not doing that. I've got a 5mm socket that is specifically used for tightening down any 5mm nuts. So like on the back of motherboards, when they used to have the little nuts that your printer would screw into, your parallel port or your VGA, these are all 5mm, and so are the motherboard standoffs. Now, because they don't really use those screws anymore on the back of the ports, about the only time I ever used this ratcheting driver, which I picked up from Harbor Freight Tools for about $12, comes with the bits, and about the only time I need it now is when I get a cheaper case that you have to put the standoffs in. I'm seeing this less and less often, and in fact, it's been a while, I think, since I've had to do this. When I order those really inexpensive, like no-name brand cases from Asia, this is, you know, CareyHolzman comes to mind. One of the worst cases I've ever worked on. Not this one, but CareyHolzman. This one's, so far, it's not terrible. It's sort of what you would expect for the price. You know, they're not giving it away. There's not a bargain in here. It is a fair case for the money, so far as I can tell. And if the case isn't good enough, it's because you didn't spend enough. That's very reasonable for the price. Well, they're giving us extra thumb screws for some reason. You know what? Let me just spill this out here so you can see what's in this bag. They've not separated any of the screws. They just give you a bag and they just vomited them all in one bag. So you're going to have to dig through here and figure out what goes to what. Again, company like NZXT or Fantex gives you a nice little enclosure or separates the screws in separate bags, keeping everything together with an explanation as to what they're for. In this case, you're on your own. Here you go. Here's a bunch of screws. And if you've never built a computer before, this may not be clear to you where the screws go, and you'll figure it out. It's not rocket science. But they definitely aren't helping. If you want that help, you got to spend more. The problem is, Richard really wants to keep his optical drives, and he's absolutely allowed to. But the public in general has stopped buying and renting DVDs. You can't get DVDs in the mail anymore from Netflix. Redbox has filed for bankruptcy. Blockbuster is long gone. Everybody streams everything off the internet. You don't have to maintain your own library. You don't need the space for it. Everything more or less is available online at higher quality on demand, even while you're traveling on your phone, all for just a streaming subscription price, which is often cheaper than the cost of one DVD. DVDs are not in HD, so even the streaming is better quality, a bigger array of variety, and available on demand anywhere you have internet access. Now, some people can set that up on their own with a cloud service. I know Mitch enjoys his movies and music when he's traveling, but that's not for your everyday user. That takes a little more complexity. Some people much prefer to own their content than to rent it. I would like to own my life rather than rent it, but at some point I have to return it. All of our lives are on a subscription basis. All right, so that's all 9 of the standoffs, and let's see, let me get rid of these front port umbilicals are kind of in the way. They're tight up here against the edge of the motherboard tray. One good thing about the cheaper cases is they're very lightweight. The materials are very thin. They're very, bendable. Don't stand on this. Don't use it as a step ladder because it will collapse underneath the weight of you. But it's not designed to be used as a step ladder. Now, cases from like other manufacturers, even from Fractal Design, they have better built cases than this, where the materials used are of a better, higher grade. But the benefit is it's very light, very light. There's 2 sides to every coin. Oh, we're going to need an I/O shield, and I've got that right here. We do have a grounding tab. We're going to make sure you pull those up a little bit, because if that folds down when we put the motherboard in, you may not notice it until you're done and you try and plug something in. Then you got to take it all back apart again. Ask me how I know. We've certainly done that a few times on these live videos where I was building in too big of a hurry or not paying close enough attention to detail to what I was doing. Anytime it happens, it's always the builder's fault. Now, the manufacturers could choose a better design, but if you're building, it's on you to make sure you're building it correctly. Okay, so that's our I/O shield put in. And bring this down. And what I'm doing right now is what I call a dry fit, and it's just that I want to make sure this board's going to fit in here without any obstructions or any fitment issues. I want to make sure everything, according to the ATX standard, this should go in, fit like a glove. And it does. I will say that the 5¼ inch bay up here and the 3½ inch hard drive bay down below are something I haven't worked with in a long time. So the motherboard has to go in with just a little bit of spare space, maybe about 1 inch. Beside the 5¼ inch bay is only 1 inch away from the board, and the 3½ inch hard drive bay is literally 0.5 millimeter away from the bottom of the board. So if you saw me struggle to get that board seated, it's because I had to work around those unmovable objects that are not normally in a modern case these days. Not like this. It's not good or bad. It's just it kind of threw me for a second because I'm like, why is this in my way? Oh, okay. Most cases don't have this big bay here. Not these days. So it does make installing the board a little easier, but not like that was hard anyway. Just kind of threw me for a second. I was worried the board wasn't going to fit. It wasn't going in, and it was being blocked both up here in the corner and down here at the bottom. And I was like, thinking to myself, this is ATX, right? Just got to be a little more mindful when I install it. Now, the question is, which of these screws is the one used to hold the motherboard down? So if I look at, there's usually another standoff in here. Did they not give us a spare one? So we have a socket. I have my little tool. They've given you a 5 millimeter socket that you can put over the standoff. And then on this end of it, instead of a socket wrench, it's a Phillips screw head, so you can use a Phillips screwdriver. The problem with that is it can be very difficult to know how tight you're putting the standoffs in. If you over tighten them, the motherboard tray will strip out. They'll never tighten ever again. So I don't like those. I don't see a spare standoff. Normally what I would do at this point is I would grab a spare standoff and just try different screws to figure out which one is the right one. We did not get a single spare standoff. There's another bag of screws in here I just realized that says 2300. I don't know if these are motherboard standoff screws or if these are for optical drive installation. Well, let me rephrase. I definitely know you can use these to install your optical drives. What I don't know is which screw is being used to fit into those standoffs we put in. I probably should have checked it. These short little screws here that have a coarse thread, these are usually for hard drive installations. So if there's 2 hard drives that can be installed, that's a total of 8 screws. But we also have 8 standoffs that take screws. So by counting the screws, that won't answer the question for us either. We have a very shallow flathead screw, and for some reason, we only have 1 of those. I don't know why. That's very strange. We have the thumb screws. They definitely are not being used. Don't put thumb screws on your motherboard. Gosh, I am not sure. These kind of look like something you would put on the motherboard. Do we have 8 of them? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, it might be on one here. 7, 8. Well, you better not lose one because they give you 0 extras. I think these are the motherboard standoff screws. I think these are the optical drive screws. We've got 4 power supply screws, even though our power supply already came with screws. And then you have no screws for your 3.5-inch drive. They don't. Fractal design doesn't even give you enough screws to fill your drive bays. How crazy is that? You can put your motherboard in, or you can screw your mechanical drives down. Pick one. Wow. You want to talk about being chintzy. How much do screws cost? There should be an additional 8 shallow screws, like when I'm holding, for mounting into this drive. Well, wait a minute. I take that back. This drive cage is screwless. Just like a Synology NAS, you pull this apart, put your mechanical drive, and there are pins that lock in, and then you slide this in. And then I think there's a way you can put a screw in there to keep it from moving if you were to ship this or move it. And that's optional, you don't have to use it. Okay. See how education can change attitude. Here I was upset they were being cheap, and then I got educated by realizing these don't take the screws I assumed. They don't take any screws at all. And now suddenly, now that I've educated myself, it all makes sense now, and I can't complain about that because that was me being ignorant. All right. Let me try with a mechanical driver to see if these are the right thread type. We definitely don't want to use the cordless driver because I don't want to cross-thread anything. Those are the correct screw. I mean, labeling would have been beneficial, but we got there. I'm just going to get them started. I don't want to tighten any of them down because I may need to sort of wiggle the board a little bit to get all of the 9 or 8 mounting points to align properly. Once we get them all started, then we can go by each one and tighten them. Just make them snug. Don't over tighten. It's not airtight or watertight or anything. We're just securing the board. That's all. So once it's snug, there's no reason for you to justify going any past, turning it any tighter than that. Everything's lining up really nice, by the way. I've not had to jiggle the board once. Once it's seated under the center post, which is why it has, and thank goodness it has that, by the way. Without that center post, this would be a lot more challenging. Still not rocket science, but they made it a lot easier with that. So as much as I dig on it, not everything is terrible. I'm a little spoiled in that I typically work with more modern stuff, but I just have to remind myself sometimes this is how we used to do it all the time. It's been a while. Okay, now what I'm going to do, I've got one screw this is just not going to fit down in deep enough. And I've got my electric driver here with a torque setting of 3, and we're just going to make sure we tighten all these down because this is the last screw. And it needs to go in this area that's really hard to reach. And there it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's it. Our board is now installed, it's secured, it's happy. So, Richard expressed to me some concern about the lack of a rear case fan here. And again, the front fans aren't necessary. They're mostly there for show. If he had an external or a discrete graphics card in here, this would make more sense for actual practical usage. We're not going to remove them. We are going to use them. And they're going to push air out the back. Whether we have a fan or not, that air, as long as we don't have fans up here or down here impeding the flow of air, it's going to push out. If the opposite is also true. If we just had a rear case fan, just one, then nature creates a vacuum, negating the need for any front fans. It'll draw the air in it needs. Unless your case is sealed up tight like an aquarium, you usually have vents, like there's vents all across the front on this case, and nature creates the vacuum and pulls in the amount of air it needs. If you want to force more air into it than it needs, in most cases it's unnecessary. Again, if you have a discrete graphics card, that may not be true for you. But without the discrete graphics card, you do not ever need front fans. They're purely aesthetic. They also bring in a lot more dust. If you don't have the front fans, you won't need to dust your computer as often. That being said, you absolutely want a rear case fan. You want to keep the air moving. The air is already moving here anyway. As we add more fans, or as we add any more components, we add more components that can fail. So if I'm building a computer using 7 components, think about this for a minute. We have the case, the power supply, the motherboard, the CPU, the RAM, the storage device, the CPU cooler, and now we've got 2 case fans. We now have 9 points, minus the case, we have 9 points of failure. We add another fan, we have another point of failure. We add a liquid cooler, we had 3 more points of failure, the pump and the fans on the pump, or on the radiator, and the radiator itself. The more you add, the more it costs you, and the more likely you are to experience one of those parts failing. If you drive a motorcycle, you're unlikely going to have 4 flat tires at the same time. With a car, it's possible. The cost of the tires should be half as much, and the chances of getting a flat tire should be half as likely. The more tires you have, say you have an 18-wheel trolley, big semi-truck, you're going to be buying tires more often because you have 18 of them, okay? You're 18 times more likely to have a flat or need to replace a tire than somebody on a unicycle. So it's simple math. If you want to add 2 optical drives, and especially given all optical drives are going to be older, your older stuff is likely going to be the first thing that fails. Now, I don't know if that failure is going to be in 10 months or in 10 years, but when you experience a failure, and if you own it long enough, you will, your point of failure will almost always be whatever old stuff you're carrying into your new build. Even an old printer, an old keyboard, an old external drive, an old cable. Statistically, in this line of work, when I see people carry old hardware into new hardware, it is always the old hardware that causes the first failure, but not necessarily anytime soon. Okay? It also depends on how much wear and tear and condition the hardware was when we put it in and how old it is. The fans on the front of this Fractal case are not nocturnal grade fans. These aren't the modern kind of fans they put in even cheap cases today. These are built to a lower quality, in my opinion. These fans will likely be an early point of failure because they move. Anything that moves, mechanical hard drives have spinning platters, fans, they're likely also going to be an early point of failure long before anything's solid state. So we're talking statistics. We're not saying this is absolutely for sure going to happen to you. This is just pretty common when it does, and these are the reasons why. So we definitely keep an eye on these. If we start hearing buzzing noises, it's likely one of the fans going out. If you want to avoid that, you can disconnect the fans or you can buy better fans. On the other hand, these fans may run trouble-free for years and years and years. It kind of depends on if the machine's left on all the time or if it's turned off and turned on and how dusty the environment is. We certainly have customers that put an ashtray next to their computer and it just sucks the smoke right into it. And those computers always have problems. The smoke from the cigarettes gets into everything. And again, I'm not talking about Richard here, okay? I'm not specifying anything about this customer. I'm just saying in general, in my business, what I see and the types of repairs that I do, moving components and older components are typically the first to fail. So if we can reduce the number of components overall, we reduce the likelihood of a failure. If we build this with 2 mechanical drives and 2 NVMe drives and 2 optical drives and 6 fans, we have just added, we've almost tripled the number of failure points, potential failure points, that if it was built to a minimum, likely would be less likely. You can't avoid all failure. Sometimes it doesn't matter what you do. You know, if there's a power spike that hits and it fries your computer, it had nothing to do with any of this. I don't get too many of those repairs. It doesn't happen very often. What does happen more often is I get a call that something's buzzing. It's always a fan. Nothing solid state should buzz. There's no moving parts. Because there's no moving parts, it's far more reliable. That's why solid state drives are so much more reliable than mechanical drives. It's not even close. That doesn't guarantee you're not going to have a problem. I can't emphasize this enough. When I'm selling parts to a customer and I have to support that customer, support costs me money. I do not make money from warranted support. So my goal is to avoid it as much as possible by making sure my customers don't have problems within my control. It's always going to happen. I can't avoid it 100%, but I can put the odds in my favor that it doesn't happen often. And one of the ways to ensure system reliability, uptime, and customer satisfaction is to make the system as simple as possible. Don't overthink it. Don't spend money you don't need to spend. That's an enthusiast activity, and the enthusiasts don't mind when their computers break because they got nothing else to do anyway. They enjoy it. I don't mean they don't have anything else to do. What I mean is they're not being put under pressure. This needs to be fixed right now. It's your responsibility. It's under warranty, at your expense. Stop what you're doing, get over here and do it now. That's the pressure I feel when it's somebody else's system that I'm accountable for. But when it's your own system, it's up to you to decide what you're willing to tolerate. When you're building a scale, right, and you're building 100 computers a year or more, How can you sustain that if all you're doing is repairing everything you built? There's no time for you to get any new customers. You're spending more than you're earning, and you're going to close your shop because you can't pay the bills. Your customers are going to be pissed off at the inconvenience and feel like you don't know what you're doing. And it doesn't matter how much they paid for it, no matter what good, hey, I gave you a computer really cheap. Not acceptable. You should have sold me the computer at a fair price. That was a good machine that wasn't going to require you to keep coming back and fixing it. So either you don't know what you're doing, but the customer won't be fixated on the price anymore. They're going to be fixated on what they see as you sold me crap or you don't know what you're doing. So trying to just aim solely at price pretty much means you're going to burn that customer. You're going to go through a lot of customers. You're probably not going to get a lot of repeat business. And if you're selling the customers really expensive machines, then typically you would build in a price for supporting those more complicated, more trouble likely machines. Because of their complication, they typically require more support, and you should build that into your price. So when it comes to a rear case fan, I would not put a fan in like this. I would put in a decent quality fan. And almost any fan from any major manufacturer today, from Corsair to Lian Li, Noctua, boy, so many of them, Fantex, the quality of the fans being made today are so much better. They're quieter. Be Quiet has a number of their Silent Wings and Pure Wings fans that are much more aggressively priced than Noctua, made, I believe, in Austria as well, and are built to a very high standard. If you do insist on going on Amazon and buying the cheapest fan you can get, they still sell these today. It's old inventory. They're years and years old, and they're not going to walk off the shelves. They're going to sell them to you, and they're going to make the price really attractive and say, it's your problem now. You might be buying inventory that's 10 years old. And if you want to do that because it's more important for you to save the money, hey, I just want you to understand why it's priced that way. And if you're good with it, I'm good with it. So what we want to do is we don't want to overpay. I think Noctua is way overpriced for what you get. I think you can get a fan as good as Noctua for less than half the price of a Noctua fan. The Noctua fans are great. Don't get me wrong. They're ugly, but they're great. They're also profoundly expensive compared to literally any other fan manufacturer in the PC fan business. So for me, I would probably use a Be Quiet fan for this. And we might even have some laying around here. They're very inexpensive, very aggressive. The price is a great deal for the quality of fan you're getting. I think the cheap fans are overpriced because they're crap. And the Noctua fans are overpriced because they can. You're paying for the name. Let's see. What do I have here for fans? I'm going to throw this in for Richard. I am buried up to my eyeballs in 120 and 140 millimeter fans. And that looks like it's a 120 millimeter or 12 centimeter fan. So, again, the state of Studio C is such that nothing is put away yet. Everything is scattered everywhere. And I know, I'm laughing because I am overwhelmed with parts scattered about. But I know I have a bag full of fans. I just have to figure out where I put it. And they're not going anywhere. They don't serve any purpose. They're just inventory. That's why I'm happy to just give it to Richard. He can have it. What is this? That's not there. That's not it. Somewhere here, it's a bag that obviously got pushed to the back because it's nothing I need very often. There was a guy that was buying some equipment from me, and I think I sold him 40 fans for $10. And they were just old fans that came out of generic cases, and they were building and collecting. And I go, hey man, you want to buy some fans? And he's the guy that sells on Facebook, you know, you give him the money, he gives you the computer, and you never see him again. He's happy to buy the cheapest fans he can get his hands on. So it worked out for me and it worked out for him. And his customers don't know who I am, so they're not going to blame me. Come on, Carey, where did you put the bag of fans at? Well, I'll tell you what, let me think about this for a second, because it's funny because I have a lot of them. It doesn't seem possible I can't find something I have so much of. But we have lots of fans. So let's go ahead and put the power supply in, and let me think about where I put those fans. I'm sure it's just going to come to me. Now, the power supply came with 4 mounting screws that are black that match the case. Sometimes power supply screws will be silver and the case will be black. And then I'll use the screws that come with the case to color match. Even though not many people are looking at the back and would ever notice that detail, it's something important to me. The fan on the bottom of the power supply sucks air in. So if you put this computer on carpet, you've got a very expensive vacuum cleaner and you're suffocating your power supply. Your power supply brings air from the bottom and blows it out the back. It does not accept any air from inside of the case, nor does it eject any air into the case. This is its own ecosystem. It runs its own temperature. It gets its own dust collection. And if you're not paying attention to the state of your power supply and you're focused on your CPU temps and your GPU temps and your frames per second, you're missing the big picture here. This needs more of your attention. There's usually a filter underneath this built into your case. You should be checking that every 6 months. You could be suffocating your power supply even though you spent $30 on unnecessary thermal compound obsessing about your CPU cooler. Well, your power supply is overheating and choking to death. Why aren't more channels talking about that? I don't know. So the screws that came with the power supply and the screws that came with the case intended for the power supply are exactly the same screws. So it doesn't matter which ones we use. In general, I like to use the screws that come with the power supply. But if for some reason there's a color mismatch, or I don't know, I can't think of any other reason, then I'll use the screws that come with the case. Otherwise, the screws that come with the case will be extra, and they might come in handy for something down the line during a repair or upgrade. One thing I am noticing is the screws that came with the power supply, there are little ridges on these screws that otherwise, they're the exact same screw that came with the case, but no, I can't see that. Hold on. Let me show you. Again, another detail. Most YouTube channels are not going to tell you about these little details and why they're there, but I can explain it to you. These screws at the very base of the screw, which is, if it'll focus, I don't know if we can get that to focus. Oh, it had it. Right around the lip here, there are ridges, and they're angled so that when this tightens in, it digs into the metal and it won't easily unscrew itself. The ones that came with the case, these are completely smooth. Now, in all likelihood, that won't make one difference or the other. But somebody put a little bit more thought into including these screws with the power supply because they added weight. You see the ridges that exist along the base? That's so it bites into the metal and locks in. It's a very minor little thing, but the fact that somebody thought to engineer it that way and include it meant it was important to them. And if you don't notice it, well, it's something you can't look for or appreciate. Now, when you're shipping computers, like if you're Dell or HP, The idea that a screw can shake loose in shipping as a machine's being bounced about is highly, highly likely. I've seen a lot of that. But if you're building your own computer at home and you're just, moving it in the room or upstairs, you're not going to bounce that around enough for that to make any difference whatsoever. All right, what do we got here? Just check on email and see how we're doing. Very good, very good. Okay, now I suppose the next thing I can do is go ahead and hook the power supply up. So we're going to grab this cable, our EPS 12 volt cable, and we'll run it through here, like so, just like this. And what I'm trying to do when I run my cables is I'm trying to keep them from weaving. And this is the best time to make your life so much easier in the future, is to make sure your cables have no obstruction, that they're free and clear, so that you get the greatest length out of them. The minute they start weaving with other cables, it makes it very difficult to cable manage later, and very difficult to repair it when you have to remove cables to, say replace the motherboard, worst case scenario, and now your cables are all intermingled. And I always do my cabling in the way that I want it if I'm going to be the next person who works on it. A lot of people could care less about their cabling, and a lot of people are the ones that are going to deal with their own mess. But when I'm building something for somebody else, I want to make sure I take the time to show that I care, that those details matter to me, and that if the computer ever comes back to me for repair or upgrade, it'll be a pleasure for me to work on it. I won't have to work as hard because I will have taken the time now to make that future work easier. That's why it's important. But there's also the reason of just making it look good, right? Which, a lot of people, average customers, typically don't buy computers with glass panels. They don't care what the inside of the computer looks like. You don't see too many Dells and HPs in corporate America that have glass panels. And nor do you really find it in most end consumer homes. Typically, computer enthusiasts and gamers are the people who want that stuff. So, and that's okay. Nothing wrong with it. It's just, it doesn't make up the majority. Can't find my glasses. The majority is important to me because I want to stay in business, right? If I'm servicing a niche clientele, it's going to be harder for me to find work. So whatever the most common kind of work is I do is what I'm trying to explain to you, because if you want to get into this line of work, you can choose to only work on gaming enthusiast computers, but I just don't know how you're going to stay in business very long. It's possible. I think you might want to work harder than I do. But for me, my satisfaction is in helping people do things that make a difference, right? That's what keeps me motivated, is knowing this company can't operate. They can't help their customers unless I get this work done. Whether or not you can play Fortnite doesn't make a difference to me one way or the other. If you want to pay me to fix it, I'll fix it. But I certainly don't have the, like if I was a surgeon, I would not want to do elective surgeries unless they were important. I want to save people's lives. I want to help make people's lives better. I wouldn't want to do elective work that didn't need to be done, that could potentially cause my customer long-term damage. And that's not why I would have become a doctor. But that's just me. I want to save lives, not... There are reasons for plastic surgery that are necessary, and that's one thing. But just totally voluntary elective plastic surgery, yeah, that's just not work I'd want to do. Flashlight. I'm trying to remember which one of those EPS connectors I use. The one closest to the edge of the board. Yeah, okay. Trying to remember where I put those fans. Okay, that's good. And then we've got the big 24-pin power cable we can put on. So let me grab that. And we're going to run that down through here, like so. There we go. And then, let's see. Bring it up here. Perfect. That is perfect. So when you start maxing out all of the slots on a computer, you're going to run into some cable management issues. If you notice, and I'll turn this around in just a second, but when we put this power cable on, it's going to start blocking the pathway to the 5¼ inch bottom bay. The top one's completely open and free, but the bottom one will now, we're going to have to work around this. The only way around that is to get a bigger case, a taller, bigger case, or to not put so much stuff in here. To each of the optical drives, we will have to run a power cable, and to each of the optical drives, they'll each need a SATA cable. So that's 3 additional cables. And then we have to adapt those cables around this big motherboard power cable, and then find a way to hide those cables so we don't see them. But at the same time, we want to manage them so that if we ever have to change any drives out or make any changes to the layout of the hardware installed, that we're not spending a half an hour just trying to untangle and unwind those cables. So it's an elegance to cable management to make it both aesthetically pleasing and practical to work on, but at the same time, work within the confines of the size of the case and how much stuff you're putting in there. It just means you're going to have to spend a little bit more time if it's important to you. These days, most people that need optical and DVD drives will do so through USB. You plug it in, they cost about the same amount of money, and when you use it, it's right there. And when you're not using it, you can unplug it and put it away, or even move it from computer to computer. One of my clients has about 20 machines, and we were putting optical drives in each one of them, and they're not expensive. They're about 20 bucks a piece, but times 20 machines, that's an additional about $440 after sales tax, thereabouts. Plus the added labor, you're probably looking at close to $1,000 in total to make sure every machine has an optical drive. So when the USB external optical drives came out, it made more sense to order 2 or 3 of those and leave all 20 without. In other words, the cases that have these bays are harder and harder to find. So instead of trying to insist on buying an older case like this one from 2017, instead of forcing something, we learned to go with the flow. It's cheaper, it's easier, it's no cable management involved. And you go on Amazon, you can buy an external DVD drive. They're about $5 more than an internal one. You plug it into the USB port, and if you have 20 computers, instead of buying 20 optical drives, unless all 20 people need it at the same time, we have a couple of different ways of doing this. One is, and here's what my customer decided. They decided there were 2 employees that needed their own optical drives to keep at their desk. And they wanted a spare one to keep in the parts room for any other employee to use, or should one of these fail or get dropped on the floor and break, they have a backup essentially. They've never used the backup. And their usage of the DVDs has been reduced more and more and more. So as we move forward now, we don't build computers with DVD drives. They now simply reuse the external DVD drives on any future computers we build from this point forward. They're transferable. You just plug it in when you need it. If you needed to have an optical drive used by somebody in the office who didn't have any USB ports, you could share it on the network, but they'd still have to, someone would have to load the disk into it, but you'd still be able to share it like any other drive over the network. That's part of the reason why these are fading out. Is it's not saying that people aren't using them anymore, it's that they're fading out. And there are other ways to accomplish this task. There may still be people using floppy disks, and we don't put floppy drives in computers anymore. But you can buy a USB external floppy drive reader if you still need one. And you just plug it right into your USB port, you're good to go. So do know that these are options to consider moving forward. You're welcome to hold on to the older technology, but you don't necessarily have to hold yourself back to accommodate it. And I think a lot of people are not aware of just how inexpensive and how portable these external DVD drivers are. Also, if the drive should fail, it's a lot easier to replace it. You don't have to disconnect uncable anything inside of the computer. You just unplug it. Buy a new one. It's really easy. More and more we're seeing hardware being converted to USB. Everything from flash drives, which make more sense than DVDs these days for storage capacity and speed and cost, to Wi-Fi adapters now being USB, where you don't have to open the computer anymore. You don't have to even use a screwdriver. You just plug it in, you're good to go. Your biggest problem would be running out of USB ports. So this motherboard already has Wi-Fi built into it. And as far as USB ports go, we have 2, 4, 6, 8 USB ports plus 2 up front. That's a total of 10. That should be more than enough. Most people have a keyboard, a mouse, a printer, maybe a second printer, maybe a webcam, maybe a flash drive. I don't see many people using more than 6. People do, not many people do. So you should be good. Let's see what you guys are saying in the chat room. Here's what this looks like with it all cabled up. We still have our USB sound and front panel header and front USB port. So unfortunately, and this is something cheaper cases do, this USB-C plug right here is for 2 USB 3 ports. You cannot separate them. 2 ports are in this cable. But when you plug this in, you don't get 2 USBs out of the case. You only get one USB 3. That's all this is, USB 3. This cable's carrying 2, but the case only terminates to 1. Then, instead of giving you 2 USB 3s, because that would cost more, they give you a second USB 2 cable. Now the USB 2 cable is an additional cable you need to run that's going to give you, in this cable, 2 USB 2s, but in the case you only get 1 USB 2. So instead of just giving you 2 USB 3s in one cable, you lose one of your USBs in this cable, and you lose one of these USBs in this cable. So he could have 12 USB. He does have 12, but he can only access 10 of them because the case manufacturer limited him in their design. He's got 1 USB 3 and 1 USB 2. Doesn't make any sense. It was a cost-cutting measure. On the other hand, you're also adding another cable you shouldn't need to add. This is redundant if they simply would have used both of the USB ports on this. Either that, or like in some NZXT cases I've shown on this channel, you have 4 USB ports, two USB 2s carried by this cable, and two USB 3s carried by this cable, and two USB 2s. So you have two black ports and two blue ports. This has one blue port, one black port. So by saving money on the case manufacturer is not allowing him access to two USB ports he's paid for on the motherboard, but he'll never be able to use. At least not if they're terminated here. He'd have to buy some kind of an adapter that means he'd have to remove an optical drive to make up for that. Give and take. Give and take. Again, it's not a bad thing, but it may not be something obvious to people when you're shopping for cases. Pay attention, because if they're miscolored, if one's blue and one's black, you're going to be in this. It's very common for case manufacturers to do this. I think it saves them 3.5 cents. And you and I both know that those USB ports are worth a lot more than 3.5 cents. So it's not their money they're saving. They're spending your money, preventing you from using the hardware you bought. And if you don't use USB ports much in the front, I guess it doesn't matter. But it really bothers me that this cable is going to carry two USB ports and terminate to one. And this one's also going to carry two USB ports and terminate to one. From the way I see it, the case manufacturer stole two of my USB ports. I don't know any other way to look at it. They stole them. I paid for them. They belong to me, but they won't hand them over. So be careful when you're buying cases. Pay attention, and this will affect the price of the case. And that's why it's done. It's done to bring the price of the case down. And it's an added cable we have to run that we shouldn't have to run. USB 3 is backwards compatible with USB 2, so it makes no sense why you would need one when you already have the other. If you already have USB 3 that's backwards compatible with USB 2, there's no reason you need a USB 2 port. It's just a cost-saving measure. And again, the cost savings is pennies. Whether or not so I know I'm painting that from my tone as a bad thing because I don't like it personally. But just because I don't like it personally doesn't mean it's a bad thing for you. What my concern is, this is something you won't realize if you're your average customer until after you bought the case. So I just want to make you aware of it. And then you can choose, now that you know what to look for, and if it's important to you or not is up to you. Peter with a €1 Super Chat contribution. Right on. Thanks, Peter. David Graham renews membership. Now a member for 14 months. Thank you, David. David Graham with a $2 Super Chat says, is it possible to use too many USB ports? If you have 10 USB ports, you can use 10 USB ports. But if the USB device you're plugging in requires voltage, and another USB device requires voltage, your USB port can only deliver so many volts. And if you overdraw it, well, let's say in a house, you've got a Christmas tree all set up and all your Christmas lights and a surge protector plugged into a surge protector, plugged into a surge protector. Can you plug too many things in? Well, when you do, you're going to blow a breaker. You're going to throw one of the breakers as a safety precaution to prevent your house from burning down. What happens with USB is people will plug in something that requires power, such as a external hard drive, like those little laptop drives that I like to use. Those run off USB power and USB data. And that'll pretty much consume one pair of USB ports, even though in fact, some, you may have noticed, some external mechanical drives that plug into USB actually have two plugs, because oftentimes the USB port can't deliver enough power to both simultaneously spin that drive up and pull the data from it. But if what you're plugging in is data transfer only and it's not really using much in the way of voltage, I think you could plug into like 200 devices. I don't know what the limit is. When that happens, it means you're drawing too much power. When you're plugging a drive in and nothing happens, it's not getting enough power. And you can resolve that by using a port on the back of the computer or buying a powered USB hub on Amazon. It'll plug into the wall and it'll deliver power to the 4 USB ports, or however many USB ports are on the plug. And then that'll plug into one of your USB ports for data only and provide its own power from the wall. But now think of all those cables you're adding. So the answer to your question is yes and no. It kind of depends on what you're plugging in, how many items you're plugging in at the same time, and what sort of power consumption you're using, because a USB cable is a low power cable. And it's not really designed for you to plug 10 hard drives into, but it's possible with a powered hub. I appreciate the question. Phil Stodd said this motherboard has USB-C capabilities. Yes, it does, but the case does not. So we will not be adding any USB-C to the case. However, the motherboard has USB-C on the back. So if Richard wants USB-C, it's right back here for him to use. If he wanted USB-C up here, he'd have to have bought a more modern case. It would have cost him more money. And it probably wouldn't, he's got to sacrifice something. He can't have everything. If he wants the optical drives, and he wants USB-C, and he wants the ability for a full-size board that has Wi-Fi, all of these things can be answered with money. No problem. But if we're also trying to stay within a certain budget, and we're trying to get this done as cost effectively as possible, then it's time to decide what's important and what you can sacrifice and live without. Everything has a price. Everything's possible. At the end of the day, it's up to the customer to decide their own priorities with regards to how important are those optical drives. To Richard? Richard never once mentioned USB-C, but he's mentioned USB and optical drives countless times. It's pretty clear where his priority is. But if he was mentioning both equally, this would not have been an ideal case for him, at least if he wanted the USB-C up front. That's also true of those old cases I mentioned earlier that my client is still using to this day. They don't even have USB 3 on them. They're still USB 2 up front. Those old Leon Lee PC99s. And guess what? They don't even notice. It's not as though they're buying high-end data transfer devices to plug into the USB ports. They don't. When they get a flash drive from a client that has data on it, they plug it in, they copy the data off. It's not like they're like, hey, this is taking too long. I've never had that complaint from them. So they don't notice it. It's typically something more enthusiast-oriented when we talk about USB 2 versus USB 3. Most end users can't tell the difference. They plug it in and it doesn't matter if it takes 2 minutes or 20 minutes. Normally, they just accept it and move on. I very rarely get a call going, could you make my USB faster? I don't think I've ever gotten that call. But again, most of my clients are office users, so most everything they do is online. I'll put that over there. They've given us some zip ties. Apparently they determined that 5 is all you get. This little piece here is typically used in businesses, and it's designed to keep the panel from being removed. You can place a lock inside of it. You screw this down. I don't know why you just wouldn't take the screw out, but you can screw this down and place a lock, and this prevents your employees from opening up the computer and stealing the RAM and things out of the inside of it. So we don't typically use these. If we have a company that's worried about an employee stealing from them, it's time to talk about resolving the issue with the employee, not about trying to prevent the employee from doing something. It's time that they shouldn't be an employee anymore. So we don't use those. That's an employee issue. Now, there are big corporations that have thousands of employees. That's a different scenario. But in the small businesses I work with, you know, lawyers' offices, doctors' offices, dentist offices, accountants, real estate agents, everybody knows everybody. You don't have a revolving door of employees. And when somebody new comes in, the regulars there keep an eye on them anyway. So it's not like the new person in a big corporation who's left alone with the hardware at night. Oh, and now we've got security cameras everywhere. So again, this case is from 2017. Things have changed a lot in the last 7 years. I really don't think they do this anymore, They do have Kensington lock ports on the smaller, more portable machines to keep employees from walking out of the door with them. But I've never seen a customer use a Kensington lock on a computer before. But again, I'm not working in corporate America either. Not anymore. Michael says, my name is spelled Mayorello? Hey, good luck. My name, Carey, I've been called Terry and Barry and Jerry. And then when they call me Carey, they spell it wrong. And that's a simple name. It's only got 5 letters in it. Good luck to you, Michael. John Paul Bacon mentions there are Type C to Type A adapters. That's true. You can adapt, but not everything will work with the adapters. Some things work, some things don't. And then it depends on what Type C. Like if you want 40 gigabit per second transfer speeds, with a Type C to Type A adapter, you're going to have the right adapter, or you're just not. It'll work, it just won't work at the higher speeds. So if you look at the cost of Type C cables, one Thunderbolt 4 Type C cable that's only 18 inches long can set you back $45 or $50 versus a cell phone Type C charging cable where you can get 5 for $2. They're not the same cable. They're built to a different standard, and the charging cable won't carry data in most cases. So when they do carry data, it's going to carry it at a limited speed because of the quality of the cable. And when you get into the higher speeds, if you don't use the more expensive higher end cables, you won't achieve the higher speeds. Same with networking. You can buy a 10 gig network adapter, a 10 gig network switch, 10 gig network router, and then use category 5 cables and get inconsistent and impractical, lower performing data transfer rates than what you paid for. Same thing. So when we're getting the Zyke drive, it's important that we use the right cable with it and that we plug it into a computer that has the capability. So it's expensive in 4 places. The cost of the internal drive that can perform at those speeds, the cost of the enclosure that can perform at those speeds, the cost of the cable that can perform at those speeds, and the cost of the adapter in the computer to perform at those speeds. If any one of those is lower, then it runs at whatever speed is the lowest. That's the best you'll get out of it until you change that one part of the chain that's slowing the rest of it up. So all of this is solved with money. You can be as demanding as you want to be as long as you're willing to pay for it. I didn't make the rules. Ekarana said, my first case came with a USB 3 front port, and it did that without wasting a header. It did that by passing the cable out the back through a PCIe bracket with a cutout. Oh, that's terrible. Oh, that's about as cheap as you can get. So what he's saying is the front port cable ran through the case, out the back of the case, and plugged into the back of the board. So it was like a USB extension cable. I cannot tell you how much I despise that ghetto garage mechanic fix. It's the equivalent of duct tape. You could also have saved time, went on Amazon and bought a $3 USB extension cable, plugged it in yourself, ran it across the top of the case, and pasted it down with some tape. Or got one of those 3M sticky hooks, stuck it on your computer, and then you just have the female end hanging here and you just plug into it whenever you need it. That would have been a lot less trouble, and it would have looked a lot cleaner, in my opinion. Now, to me, that's even worse. But again, to each their own. We have shown that on this channel before, and I hate it. Hate it. Let me just run a cable through the inside of the computer from the front to the back and loop it back into the back again. Didn't seem like it really thought that one out really well to the case designer. Like, really? That's the best you guys can come up with? I could have done that myself. Would have been a lot cleaner and cheaper. Any of you can do that, by the way. You can go on Amazon, buy a USB extension cable. You can put as many up here as you want. The question is, do you have enough duct tape? I'm just looking through your chats here because what I have to do at this point is find my fans. I know they're here. And then I'm going to put the rear fan in, hook up the front port umbilicals. I'll probably run a couple SATA cables for Richard so they'll be ready when he brings the optical drives or wants to install the optical drives. We'll have the power and data cables already there just to plug in. It's already been activated and the Windows. It's pretty much done. So overall, I feel like I went back a little bit in time on this case, but that doesn't make it bad. If this meets the needs and satisfies the customer for what they paid and what they want, if they're happy, I'm happy, and that's all that matters. If I'm building for myself, then what I want matters. And if I'm building for you, then what you want matters. I'm not here to tell you you should or you shouldn't buy something. I only want you to consider, like if you reach out to me and you want some advice, I have to understand what your value system is in order to advise you. Because what I tell you may be a completely different answer from what I tell somebody else who's essentially asking the same question, but it's the conditions that we're trying to figure out. Price, quality, ports, expandability, how heavy or how thick the case is, glass panel, plastic panel, RGB, no RGB, portable or not portable, showpiece or something that's going to stick in a corner, or something you're going to want to expand and work on, or something you're never going to open. There's so many different questions that have to be answered to get to really know somebody enough to make any sort of usable recommendation that's valuable to them. And whatever's right for you is really your decision. I can help guide you to pros and cons of each way you look at it. And then at the end of it all, you can take that information and hopefully make the right decision the first time with proper expectations that, you know, you're going to get what you pay for and you won't be disappointed at the end of it. Peter VZ with a €6 contribution. He says, for the support. Right on. Thank you, Peter. I have to figure out how to pronounce Michael's last name. Oh, I see why he wrote that. He's misspelled his own name. In the chat room, it's Michael Mayo L. Willow, but then he corrects it. And there is a way to change your username in YouTube, by the way. You don't have to. You don't have to live with a misspelling forever. You can change it. But he's the one who entered it wrong. Anyway, do know that you can edit your username, Michael. I just noticed it. Phil Stodd said, I agree with your mindset. I usually make the repair as though I'm the next person that's going to have to work on it. Oh yeah, it usually is me that has to work on it next. Well, in my line of work, there's no guarantee the customer will come back, but I try to give them every reason to by being fast, affordable, and getting it done right the first time. I don't want to lock them into a contract like a gym membership and say, you have to come to me, like I'm an HP printer and you have to buy my ink. I want you to buy my ink because it's a better value and a better quality, not because you have to. I don't want that kind of business. I want people who value what I offer. And if they don't value it, please go somewhere else. We'll both be happier. That's all. It's very simple. What's happening?
Smoke test?
Do we need to do another smoke test on it?
Yes.
All right. Well,
Richard
really?
would like to see the smoke.
Oh, Richard, what? I'm sorry. I didn't see Richard in.
That's okay.
Okay, so first of all, just a couple umbilicals I can hook up, right? Our USB 3, and that's going to go, run it through this hole right here.
Don't forget the Magic Server pixie desk.
Magic, this is not a server, and this is not IBM. All right, so USB 3 cable just pops on. It's just a friction fit. And then we've got our USB 2 cable, and that's going to connect usually down on the bottom of the board here. So I'll bring that in down through the hole down here. How is that so tight? Ooh, they did not give you much slack on this one. Holy moly. All right, well, I think we're okay though. Yeah, the USB ports, there's 2 here for internal USB, and it looks like this is not USB, this is audio, Carey. That's an audio cable. And that's going to get me in trouble because the audio cable has to go the furthest. So let's make sure that the cable's not being held up by being tangled or woven. I don't know how it's going to go this far. They kind of... Oh, look at that. Oh, there's a little tiny hole right there. And you know what? It won't fit.
Oh.
There's a fix for this. The motherboard and the power supply are in the way. Thankfully, the power supply only has 4 screws. And it does mean if we ever have to work on this, where we have to change the board out. And again, this is a case design issue. They designed it so tight that if you put a full-size board in here, there's really no wiggle room for anything. It just barely fits. So it's kind of a bare minimum kind of deal. So what we can do with the 4 screws, if I just move the power supply, then run the cable through this hole, right through there, then plug the audio cable, which is, like I said, it's one of the furthest run cables. It's one of the hardest cables to hide. And I gotta get a flashlight. Because normally we'd already be done with it, but the fact we have to take this extra step. Let's go ahead and plug that in right here. Normally, there's no order to this. You can put it on before or after. This case is not typical in that design, and this has to be done first. I didn't realize that until now. Now we can put the power supply back. Because it was just the head of the plug that couldn't fit. The cable itself is quite thin, and there's plenty of room for that without interference from the power supply. That was a surprise. Okay, and then what do I have left? The USB 2. Look, the USB 2 cable only has 1 set of cable. The other USB port that plugs into the plug is missing. There's supposed to be 4 more cables. Should be a total of 8. Because this plug has 8 pins, but it's only got 4 wires. So if you want to know where your missing USB 2 port went, it's in those 4 holes that have no wires attached to them. That's how they did it. Okay, and then USB 2, which is what I was working on, what I thought I was working on, will come down here. It's got a pin that's blocked, so it's only going to go on one way, and that's going to go right here. And then finally, we have a front port umbilicals. That's going to be your power switch, reset switch, power LED, hard drive LED. Like on a modern NZXT case, this is all just one connector. On older cases, you have to put each set of cables on individually. Not a big deal, but I'll tell you, I do get spoiled with the modern cases where you just one plug and you're done. It's not a big deal. It really isn't. It's just that when you've had it good and easy for so long, going back to the old way, it's like, oh man, I got to work 3 more seconds harder. Here's the other thing. You see this hard drive cage? It's right in the way of our front port header. So that also means that we can't just slap the connector on. We have to be very careful when we put the connector on in order to make sure we're on the right pins. And this is in the way. Now we can unscrew this cage and remove it, put this connector on and put it back just like we did with the power supply. Or what I'm about to do is work around it, which normally you don't have to work around your hard drive cage. Normally on a modern computer case, you have a shroud here and your motherboard sits above it. So this type of interference isn't possible. It's not a game changer. It's just, I've been working on some pretty nice cases the last couple of years, but this used to be a pretty common everyday thing. Now I'm gonna have to turn this towards me so I can see it, which means you guys aren't gonna get much of a view. But what I've got to figure out is which cable's which. Looks like I've got a reset cable that'll go down here. I have my hard drive LED. That's gonna go right beside our reset cable. Like I say, working around the hard drive cage is slowing me down, but it's not. Not impossible. And again, if you're not building at scale, stuff like this is not a big deal. But when it slows down your productivity and you're not able to get as much done or get as many computers built at the end of the day, you're going to have to charge your customers more. And they're not usually happy about being charged more.
Richard says if the cage comes out, he won't be adding drives.
Oh, he's not adding drives to it?
Is that
Ever? Because if I take it out, well, he can always put it back in, I guess. It's not really, I mean, first of all, thank you for conveying Richard's information. It's just like if you're used to using a sewing machine and somebody says, sewing machine's not working, we need you to do this needle in hand. Some people are like, yeah, bring it on. That sounds like fun. I'll sit there and crochet all day. But if what you're doing is you've got to crochet 15 sweaters for your kids' marching band and it has to be done by tomorrow, you might not enjoy it as much. Especially if normally you're using a sewing machine. You're like, oh, I feel like I'm going back in time. This is what my grandma used to do. I'll be working on the doilies next.
just make sure to have lots of yarn.
Yeah, we did until the cat got to it. One more cable, Carey. I'm so close. And then we can fire it up. Just one last cable. There it is. So you can kind of see the cables are sitting on top of the cage. Cage is slightly in the way. Case design could have been better, but in 2007, probably not a big deal. Today, I'm sorry, 2017, not 2007. 7 years later, it feels very antiquated to me. But that doesn't make it bad. It's vintage. I don't know why 7 years would be vintage, but that's the world we live in now. Congratulations, you're 7 years old. Are you ready to retire? All right, let me grab the power cable and the keyboard and mouse. Remember, I set those aside earlier and I forgot where I put them. I know they're over there. I was joking. Let's grab our Ethernet cable. We'll plug that in. I need an HDMI cable. We'll plug that in. Now, we have not hooked up the front case fans yet. And the front case fans, let me just see real quick. Okay, so if these are RGB, they don't have controllable RGB. The good news is that means you don't have a separate RGB cable. The bad news is you cannot turn off or control the RGB in any way because it's all being delivered through power, and that's it. So let's plug them in. Let's see if they light up. And if they do, there's nothing you can do to turn them off other than unplug them or switch them out. These are also 3-pin fans. 3-pin fans are not as controllable as 4-pin fans. 4-pin fans can slow down to 0 and speed up in a more gradual basis. As the machine gets hotter, the fans will speed up in accordance as the motherboard instructs it, which you can control in the BIOS. A 3-pin fan, or a PWM fan, these are, is that called a DC fan? Or anyway, these are still controllable. They can still speed up and slow down, but not as gradually. Like they cannot come to a complete stop. And the gradual steps between 0 and full speed are like 1/3 the amount of steps a 4-pin fan will give you. 4-pin fans cost more money. And then if you buy a 4-pin fan that's also RGB, that will cost you more money, and it will typically have a separate cable to control the RGB. And some fans have 2 different RGB. They'll have one for the blades and one for the frame. Still with the one RGB cable, but then depending on the software, you can control the outside of the frame blinking in one color and the inside of the fan blinking in multiple colors, or whatever you prefer. Or you can synchronize them to be the same color, which kind of defeats the point. But again, 2017, this was more common. I don't even know if ARGB was a standard 7 years ago. Let's see if we just plug these into the fan header on the board. We should have enough fan headers on this board to more than accommodate these 2 fans. We do. They're all the way over here. So we've got, these are 4-pin fan headers, but you can still plug a 3-pin fan on them. And I'll plug one here. And then we'll grab the other one and we'll plug it right next to it. And then when we add our rear fan, we'll likely put a 4-pin fan on that. We'll put a quality fan on there. And then that will plug in, the rear fan will probably plug in somewhere across the top because there's only 2 down here and we're going to use them both right now. Okay, so with the power supply on, we'll grab the keyboard and mouse and let's see what happens when we hit the power switch. This should be perfectly silent. I just don't know about those fans, but everything we built yesterday, you couldn't even hear it when it was on. Let's plug our USB dongle in for the keyboard and mouse. Let's hit the power button. Well, the good news on the RGB is it doesn't seem like it's RGB, it's one color. They kind of look like swastikas, but I don't know what you can do about that. And that's it. You cannot control them at all. You cannot turn the RGB off. There's no RGB controls. So if the system's on, this might as well be a power light. That's all it is. It's a power light. The fans are relatively slow spinning, which means they're quiet, which is good. And then as you can see, our RGB RAM and our Intel Laminar air cooler are RGB, and they're all just sequencing in different colors right now as their default. If I go over to the camera input 2, which is this cable here, we should be at the desktop by now. There it is. And let me go full screen. And let's do a restart and see how long our boot up time is. We'll go start, shut down, whoops. Start. Shut down. Are you ready to time this? Go. Boom. How many seconds? You ready to time it again? As soon as you see the post screen, there, start counting. Anybody got a time? There's your boot up. It's totally silent. You want to come look at it?
On my way, I counted about 10 seconds.
10 seconds?
Yeah.
Not too shabby.
Not too shabby at all. So I actually, the front case fans, I do not agree with what they look like. I think they're.
I don't think they really thought that through.
They're kind of neat, and I say that because of the way the RGB is on the fans.
Well, it's not RGB. It's one static. It's LED.
They're LED.
Yeah.
Right. So, but the lights on the fans kind of give it like this interesting design.
Yeah, and remember, it'll have 2 drives in here.
Yeah, of course. And the rest of it is super clean.
Mhm.
It's a beautifully built, well-made, great-looking PC for any use.
I think it's good for the price.
I think it's perfect. Yeah.
Now, do you think the 3.5-inch drive bay cage should stay or go?
I really want Richard to chime in on that, and I want him to make that decision.
I'd leave it in.
Because I would leave it in, at least for right now. He can use it, or he can take it out.
If he's somebody that's going to get into this a lot, he might find it in his way. Otherwise, if you're going to leave it, it's probably fine.
Let him make that.
Absolutely, of course. I was asking you what you would do.
Yeah, I would leave it.
You would leave, yeah, so would I.
I would leave it.
Yeah, unless it's in my way.
Mhm.
Because I'd be afraid of losing it.
It looks great though, and it's super clean. I love it. Yeah, and I love though that the LEDs, the lights on those front case fans, because they're simple and kind of just elegant. It's very elegant though.
You can build a machine like this for probably around $700 when we're talking like a 2 terabyte S880, very fast Gen 4 NVMe, a $200 motherboard, $240 CPU.
Mm-hmm.
So the NVMe drive is like $100. The motherboard's 200, so that's 300. CPU, let's call it 250. So you're at 550. This case is like 60 or $70.
Do you want me to put the prices?
So you're at
in
620.
the list?
Hold on. We've added this cooler. We bought the coolers off eBay for $30, but you could use the stock cooler, so you don't have to spend that. Our Windows license was on sale. They're $15 and change now during the Halloween sale at SCD Keys, using our coupon code. We'll add a rear case fan, but you can buy a rear case fan. A good one will set you back about $15. If you've got sales tax, of course, you'd have to deal with that. And the power supply was $55. I think we're under $800 in total. And you've got yourself a machine that's probably faster than anybody's machine of anybody you know, unless you know some gamers who have much bigger budgets. I think they would be jealous that you would have a machine so capable, so quiet, and so reliable at such a low price. I know gamers that spend twice as much plus just to buy a GPU. You could buy this system twice and go to a fancy dinner at Roost Chris 4 times just to make up the price of a 4090 graphics card.
That's a beautiful, clean build. Beautiful.
We'll wait till the cable management gets done.
Well, you know what though? It doesn't look like it needs much.
Oh, it's going to need it, because when he puts those 2 optical drives in,
Sure.
you're going to have your 2 power cables and your 2 SATA cables. And then back here, we don't have much room back here for cable management. When that panel goes on, see how shallow it is right here? See the motherboard tray? And see the edge of the case? We have that much room to squeeze our cables.
Yeah.
But we do have this open area right here, right? The problem is you've got a case window that's going to showcase that.
Right.
So cable management on this case is horrible. It's non-existent. If they would have made this deeper, we could have room to put our cables behind the motherboard and hide them. But they didn't offer us that consideration. But again, 7 years ago, when this case was designed, that was more common. These, if I go 7 years into the future and look at the cases I'm praising today, I will probably say, yeah, but back then, that was great. Today, it sort of feels outdated. It doesn't feel as thoughtful or as easy to work on. But
regardless of then or now, this is a beautiful build and it's very clean.
Oh yeah, no, it's not terrible. Don't get me wrong. It's not terrible. No. I just know that putting things together, like having to take the power supply out to put the audio cable on, the difficulty in getting the motherboard in because of this and this being in the way, the lack of spare screws, the fact that the standoffs weren't pre-installed, the material and how flexible, how cheap it is, the front plastic bezel, which if it gets removed too often is going to crack. These are concerns that make me worried over the longevity of the case. The lack of cable management just means you have to put more labor into it. That's all. It doesn't make it impossible. It's just that more modern cases like the NZXTs, the cable management almost happens automatically as you're building it. The front port connector's one cable, plug it right in. The power supply shroud prevents any sort of interference between your drive cage and your power supply. And then you're going to have a full glass, tempered glass, not cheap plastic cover that can crack and can start to yellow in time. That glass won't do. So when it comes to longevity, this is not ideal. Okay? But if you're planning to replace this in a few years, remember I mentioned my customer has those PC99 cases from Leon Lee. They're over 15 years old. They're all aluminum. If they bought a case like this, it would not be something we could upgrade 3 and 4 times. Likely things would start to break, or it wouldn't be the amount of money they would be spending in labor to have me do that would already pay for a more modern case that requires less labor.
Sure.
So it's not a good or a bad thing so much as it's be prepared.
Right.
That's all. So somewhere around here, I have some Be Quiet fans, and we'll just add a fan back here, not RGB, just a quiet little fan back here that'll just help bring that air out. These fans, again, mostly just for show, the ones up front. And any questions?
It's a great clean build. Very, very clean.
It's a great motherboard.
Yeah.
Richard says, I may ultimately replace the front fans. I didn't realize they were so cheap. All these fans are doing is giving you lights and bringing in dust. If you replace them to get rid of the lights, you're still bringing in dust. Those fans are doing absolutely nothing for you. If it were me, I'd take the fans out and leave them out. I would not replace them. There's no reason for those fans to be there. They're just aesthetic. And the consequences of their aesthetic is they're going to bring more dust into your computer. I would have a single rear case fan only and allow nature's vacuum to automatically draw the air in it needs. There's no reason to force air into it. There's no benefit to you for that. You'll have absolutely no cooling performance difference whatsoever. I would not replace those fans. I wouldn't do it. If you like them, keep them. If you don't like them, remove them. Replacing them is a waste of time and money, in my opinion. But it's your system, and if you want to do it, you'd be my guest. But it doesn't make any sense to me. They're not needed. They're for show. And the consequence of the show is you're bringing in far more dust. So just so you know. If you don't want those fans, we can remove them for you now. If you want to make that decision later and you want to take care of that yourself, whatever you want to do, we're happy to accommodate. Yeah. When you see me build in my, the Corsair 200R case, which is the one I was using until I couldn't get them anymore, because they also had the 2 drive bays, and my clients were using DVD drives, and I explained to you we've gone to external DVD drives now. We never hooked up the front fans. But because the fans aren't visible, we kept them in there as a spare fan. So if the rear, when, not if, when the rear fan dies and they call and go, my computer's making noise, when I go to the office with my screwdriver, all I do is take the rear fan out and throw it in the garbage can. I take the front fan off that's not plugged in and move it to the back. And there's no cost for them. It's all done. They've already got the part. If I have a client that has a graphics card in here, we absolutely want the front fans on. That's it. Otherwise, we don't need front fans. Ever. They're just for show. Richard says, I didn't realize the fans were so cheap. Well, Richard, the price of the case indicates the quality of the components inside of that case. You're not going to get a $60 fan in a $67 case. So in other words, if you were to price a quality fan from Noctua in ×2, you would exceed the cost of this case. Just those 2 fans from Noctua will cost more than the entire case. You should not be surprised because of what you paid for the case. That should have been your first alert of expectation that, you know, when you're spending under $100 for a case, there's cost cutting happening, you know. And if you want the best fans and you want the highest quality, you're likely looking at $150 or more for the case to reasonably have that expectation. Because all you have to do is price the components out individually, and you'll see replacing those fans with quality fans will cost you as much as the entire case did. At least if you're going with, you know, the best. And then why would you put the best fans into a less expensive case? Like, why would you put really expensive tires on a really old car? You know what I mean? Like, usually everything kind of fits together equally. We're going for budget, we go the whole thing budget. If we're going for quality, we do the whole thing quality. We don't usually mix and match those 2 things. We do try and find the middle, right? We try and find the best bang for the buck, but also within the expectations or demands of the customer, needing your options for having a case with 2 internal optical drives is going to be very limited these days. So you adjust accordingly. You had more than this to choose from, but not much more. Like I said, I like the Corsair 200R, and it would have been a perfect case for you. Unfortunately, I just can't seem to find them anymore. But we thank you, Richard. We appreciate you letting us build this for you and allowing us to share your build with our audience. And we're going to look forward to getting your crashing Asus pre-built in here so we can diagnose it and hopefully figure out what's going on. I'm going to take these components, Richard. Everything, this is trash, okay? But these, you might want to put these back in someday. These are going to go in your motherboard box. All the documentation that comes with the case, the power supply, the motherboard, the CPU, the SSD, all that's going to go in this motherboard box. All these spare screws are going to go in the motherboard box. I strongly recommend you put this motherboard box away somewhere where you can find it in 2 or 3 years. There's nothing in here you should need. Everything's already been done for you until you need to fix or upgrade something. There's nothing you should need to fix or upgrade unless you did not allow me to do my job. If you let me do it, it's ready for you to plug in and start using. And when some time passes and it's time for a change, you're going to want to find this box. You're going to need it. So what I recommend people do is put this somewhere where you're going to be able to find it a year or 2 from now. And that's going to have your spare screws. And anything that we're not using today, like the antennas are inside of the box. If you're not using the Wi-Fi today, but you might want to use it someday, I would leave the antennas off of it because they're easily damaged. I would just leave the antennas in the box, and when you need them, as long as you know where the box is, you'll know where your antennas are. And if there were any other spare parts that came with the case or any of the hardware, all of that will be in this one box, including your power cable. So when you get the computer from me, you're going to get the computer plug and play, ready to use, and you're going to get this motherboard box. Now, I've not experienced a crash yet. Did you experience a crash yet, Mara?
Yes, 3 times.
3 times. Huh, didn't crash once for me today. We're having a memory leak issue that's dealing with YouTube's chat room. But it's an intermittent issue. Alberto Gomez joins us as a supporter. Right on. Thanks, Alberto. Welcome in. David Graham says, Carey, your fans are in a box just over there. No, they're not in a box. They're in a bag. The problem is I've got about 47 bags. I'll find them. They didn't vanish. They did not grow legs and walk out of the room, as my mother would say. I have to say, I'm really sad and disappointed when I build a system for a client and they immediately take it apart or modify it. They have every right to, but I feel like the service I'm providing is so that you don't have to do anything. So if you choose to take it apart, it's yours to do so. But my goal as a computer tech is to make sure I've done everything for you so there's no risk of any harm. When you allow me to do my job, you make sure you tell me what you want, what you don't want. Let me do it for you. So when you get the machine, you don't have to open it up and you don't have to modify it. If you're somebody that wants to open it up and modify it, I strongly encourage you, build the machine yourself. Do the whole thing, because that way, if you enjoy that, don't let me take the enjoyment from you. I'm trying to remove a burden. And I'm also trying to control an experience. So if I give this machine to you or to anybody, and the first thing they do is take it apart, that usually leads to a support call that otherwise would not have happened. And if I would have known that's what you wanted, I would have done it as part of my service so that you wouldn't have had to, ensuring that when you got it home and started using it, you would have a positive experience. At the end of the day, though, of course, you're free to do whatever you want. I just really want you to have a good experience. And the minute you take the control away from me, it's a roll of the dice. I hope for the best. And of course, I will always help you as best I can. I would prefer that we got it right out of the gate so that you were ready to plug it in and start using it. That's my goal. So we've had a customer once, we built a really expensive computer, sent it to a client, and within 2 weeks they said it was broken and they wanted to send it back. And when they sent it back, screws were missing out of it, and the video card was bent. This thing was only 2 weeks old. I said, where are the screws? He said, I don't know, I lost them. The system was built. All you had to do was plug it in. Why did you take it apart? And when you took it apart, you've only had it 2 weeks. How could you possibly lose the screws in 2 weeks? Needless to say, I haven't heard back from that customer. We fixed it, kind of tried to understand why this was avoidable. Why is this coming back so soon? Why are the screws missing? How careless are you? It kind of offended me, like you treated my baby like that. You know? I sent a computer to one person, and as soon as they got it, they took it apart and dismantled it. And I thought, man, if I'd known you were going to do that, I wouldn't have spent so much time and care in putting it together. I just wasted my time. So things like that, that may not be their intention, you know, when they do it, but it defeats the point of my purpose, which is to make sure I take care of it for you. And if there's any changes that you want made, please let me know and allow me to do that for you so that we can, when you get it, you can plug it in and start enjoying it. That's my goal as a computer tech for all of my customers universally. Lou Greenia said his browser has crashed 3 times during the show. Wow. All right, well, another longer than expected show with a 45-minute rant on enthusiast reviewers not understanding what they're reviewing and being upset about it. I still can't let that go. What crazy times we live in. We'll do our own Ultra 7 review, and I promise you it'll be more balanced and practical. It's not going to be a blockbuster chip in the sense of performance. It's just not, no first generation chip ever is. But we'll also have more reasonable expectations. And then we'll determine if it's, you know, a good first step or a bad first step. I don't know yet. I just don't believe the measure by which these reviewers are reviewing the Ultra processor as consumers and not creators is a fair and balanced review. There's more to frames per second. There's also efficiency. And I think another thing that's overlooked is the potential of where we're going to go from here. Because we kind of ran to the end of the road on the previous gen. There was nowhere else to go. Now we've got a whole new road to journey down. And it's always going to be a rough start. Is it too rough of a start? We'll find out when we get our chip and we get our board. I expect to see that build happen, I would guess, after elections. So maybe around the end of the first week of November is when I think we'll be doing that build. It'll be a Friday build. Richard says, I'm not going to be doing anything in it. I'm just going to, hoping that I will put his optical drives in. I'm hoping that too. He's got another NVMe. I would also like to put that in for you. He says, I'm happy to have you take out the front fans. I don't need more dust. I'm happy to take out the front fans because that's 2 less cables I'm going to have to deal with. Now we could take one of these front fans and move it to the back, but then it's still going to light up. And if you don't want that, I have lots of fans around here. But if we're going to take those 2 fans out, I wouldn't remove them because they're cheap. That doesn't mean anything as far as what your personal experience is going to be. What that means is if we have 1,000 of these fans, we'll see more failures from these than 1,000 of a higher end. But when you have 2 fans, these fans could run for 15 years without a problem. We don't know. If you want, we can move one of the fans to the back, but if you don't want the light back here, there's no way to turn it off, and in which case, just let me know your preference. It doesn't matter to me one way or the other. I have lots of fans laying around. Whatever you want, we'll make sure we get it done for you. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. Thank you for your Super Chat contributions and your memberships. You guys make this channel possible. Thanks to Mara for all the work she does behind the scenes. Of course, our friends at Acronis, our friends at RoboForm, and our friends at SCD Keys, offering you all 30% off. Those coupon codes and links are in the video notes below every video I make. And leaving someone out. Our friends, Buster, Paul Gray, Oystein, and Frankie B. These are super members, and we can't thank them enough for their friendship and their support, including all of the members. You're helping us to be independent, away from the control of corporate America, so we can speak our minds honestly without bias. And you can know that's fact because there's nothing motivating us to say one side or the other side if there's no financial gain or no benefit for us to lie or to be less than transparent. Then you could always wonder, were those his words, or did somebody pay him to say that? Or was there some benefit for him to say it that way? There is no benefit other than to make sure that you guys as members are getting content you know is honest and is real. And as long as we can be functioning on our own community support, then we don't have to worry about what any manufacturers think, right? So then you don't have to wonder. You'll know for a fact, if I said something, it's because that's how I feel. There's no consequences financially for me. Unless, of course, I upset the community. That's a different story. But that'll wrap it up for me for today. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. We'll see you all again. Every Monday we do members-only videos. And sometimes pieces of those videos are edited, but the whole video itself is never made public. Those will stay private. And that's just a benefit of membership. Membership not only helps keep us independent, but it also gives you access to our video archive. Any video older than 12 months old, it's still there. It's just not publicly accessible anymore. When a video is earning 12 cents a month because 1 or 2 people watched it, it doesn't make sense to crowd the library. It also doesn't make sense to crowd the channel with old, obsolete content. So because there's not a high demand, the content is perishable. It's not like a cooking recipe that can last forever. Watching me build an i7 7700, there's just not a lot of people interested in that anymore. So it doesn't make sense to crowd up people trying to find something relevant on the channel with all the nonsense. But the archive is still there. And for members, you can go back and, the last 1,000 videos are all available to you, going all the way back to 2008. So if you're having trouble locating anything as a member, reach out to me and I'm sure I can find it for you. It's all still there. But of course, the other benefit of membership is if you have any support questions, you can email us directly, and myself and Mara are always happy to give back to our community. So if you're supporting us, we definitely want to support you back. Don't feel like I don't want to bother him. If you're supporting the channel, that is the opposite of bothering me, and I am more than happy to support you individually back in return for you supporting us individually. So feel free to reach out to our email address as a member for any support questions. And our email address is right here. Kind of hard to see that. We love hearing from our members. Again, I don't want you to think you're bothering us. showcasecreate@gmail.com. We love to hear from you, and especially if you're having any difficulties. Once again, as a benefit of membership, we will do whatever we can to support you equal to or greater than in appreciation for your support of us. Thank you so much for hanging out. We'll see all the members back on Monday. And until then, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye for now.